The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. We are recording today on June 17th for a broadcast on, I think, the 26th. And I am here today with my friend Breeauna Sagdal, who is the Policy Fellow of the Beef Initiative. She is an excellent writer, and she is a rancher in eastern South Dakota. And we're going to be talking about the plight of ranchers, what it takes to be a farmer or a rancher in the United States today, what the challenges are, how the system works, where your food comes from, and all of that. So let me get started. Breeauna is also a mom, and I don't know how she manages to do all those things and have a ranch besides, but maybe she can tell us a little bit about what it's like and how it works.
Thank you so much, Meryl. I appreciate that. Well, it isn't possible without many hands. I'll start with that. And I think I speak for every rancher across the United States today. We are all working a second job. So we are not just ranchers or farmers anymore. In many cases, it feels like we've become serfs on our own land. But most importantly, we can't do what we do in feeding America without a secondary job to support our operations. And that is extremely concerning because so many people are just getting out. It's just too much of a hassle, especially when you're trying to raise children and pay your bills and taxes and all the rest. So, yeah.
Yes, this diagram from USDA shows that in fiscal year 2023, most farmers earned a negative income. And the only way they survived was by having at least one member of the farm family working outside the home and bringing that money back to keep food on the table. Now, 98% of farms and ranches in the United States are family farms. So what does that mean? USDA says that it's at least at one person in the family owns at least 50%. At least one person in that family owns at least 50% of the farm. So 98% of farms are family farms. And something like 87% of our food comes from family farms. So keeping families on the farm is crucial in order to supply the United States with food. All right, let me go back to you now.
Well, no, I mean, that's exactly right. So in addition to 98% of our farms in the United States being family-owned farms, I think it's important to understand that, our liquidity is drying up. We are facing extraordinary circumstances right now. We do not have access to lending, for example. I called a friend of mine before going live just to double check my facts. But for example, calves are at an all-time high. And if our family wanted
So what Breeauna means is right now, to buy a calf, if you want to buy one, to grow it up to be a cow, the price of the calf is at an all-time high. And that's because the price of beef is at an all-time high. But why is that? It's because we don't have enough cows because ranchers have been losing money on cows for years. And so they had a negative in all ranchers growing both cows, lambs, pigs, chickens, all lost money on their farms. They didn't all lose money. Some made money. The median income, though, that means 50% or more had a negative income from growing animals on their ranches and farms in 2023.
correct.
So there aren't that many animals left. So when you're not making money, you either sell off all your animals so that you can make what you need to get by, right? Or you don't sell if you have money, if you have enough money to make it for that bad year, and there may be several bad years in a row, you hold on to your animals, but then you're feeding them, you're paying much more to feed them, and no money's coming in. So you need to borrow, but now she says there's no access to money to borrow. The government usually helps farmers with programs that allow them to borrow so that when they're trying to grow their crop or grow their animals, they can borrow money, and when they sell them, they can pay it back. And this is sort of how the system works on farms and ranches. Go ahead.
Yes, that's correct. So typically we would borrow against the collateral, or we would collateralize the cost of our land, right? We would borrow against our equity in our property, the loan value. But in recent years, banks have decided that agricultural debt is unhygienic. It's dirty lending, it's dirty debt, and the federal government has not um, reinstituted certain programs that we used to have that would allow farmers to borrow money to, say, buy 10 head of cows, for example, and then raise and feed them out. So we are kind of at the tip of the iceberg on our farm, and we are kind of in the throes of dealing with all of these issues at this point in time. And I think, like many farmers across the United States, we're sort of at this critical tipping point. Is it even worth it anymore? I can make much more, I can make a better living working off the farm. Should I just quit? What is all the hassle? I mean, is it worth the hassle? At the end of the day, I want to make sure that I'm raising clean, healthy livestock for my family to consume, and maybe a few others, But it's not even, let's face it, Meryl, I can't even legally sell what I grow on my farm to any of my friends, family, or neighbors. And I think that is probably one of the biggest reasons that we're seeing farms going out of business at an extremely high rate. Because,
Okay. Let me again, I got to
yes,
explain these things to the audience who haven't been delving into them the way we have. So, of course, Breeauna can sell her animals, but what she means is in order to actually sell them to a supermarket chain or to some other entity that buys them, they have to be slaughtered and processed in a facility, a meat packing facility that is inspected by and approved by USDA. And the US government encouraged those facilities to shut down since 1990. So we've lost a large number of them. And so there are small facilities that are called custom facilities, and you can have your animal processed there, but you're not allowed to sell it to the public because there isn't a USDA inspector on site. And so when you go out west, or even in Maine, there are very few of these USDA inspected facilities located around the farms. And so either you have to ship your animals a long distance, frequently hundreds of miles, even in Maine, hundreds of miles, or you use a custom facility or you slaughter it yourself, but you're not allowed to sell the meat. You can't sell the meat. Now, there are also some state inspected facilities, and those must be at least as good as a USDA inspected facility, but they have state inspectors. And you're allowed to sell your meat if it goes through a state inspected facility, but there's only a limited number of them, and not every state has them. But you can't sell that meat outside the state, only inside the state. So you can't sell to a grocery chain or the usual places you would want to sell. Now, these rules seem a bit crazy, and I think they are. They were implemented, because there were problems with the cleanliness of meat or chickens, but over time they were used to disadvantage local farmers. And the result has been, for instance, in 7 years, from 2017 to 2024, the United States lost 160,000 farmers and ranchers. They went out of business because of these kinds of rules. And in addition, we lost 20 million arable acres of land. So farmland that was being farmed up until 2017, 20 million acres. That's 2/3 the size of Iowa's arable land. Iowa is one of the biggest farming states in the country. 2/3 of that is gone. It's not being farmed because they can't make any money. Go ahead.
Right. Well, between the CRP programs and then the fact that
CRP program.
the conservation reserve programs, excuse me. So many families decided to take government money to start farming because it's just not worth trying to make a profit off of production. The other part of that is that Farm Credit Administration, Farm Services across the United States owns 46% of the United States agricultural debt. And what they hold in collateral are the lands. So if people default on their loans, the federal government, through Farm Credit, takes that land in lieu of foreclosure or takes that land for deed as a sort of stopgap on bankruptcy within the Farm Service Administration. Unfortunately, that land is then turned around and it's being sold to foreign entities. And we've all seen
You're
that.
telling us that the US government is taking farmers' land who can't pay their bills and then selling it to China? Is that what?
Well, not China specifically. I mean, in all honesty, of all of the foreign entities that own U.S. farmland, I think China is somewhere down at the bottom. It's like maybe number 5. The number one country that owns farmlands in the United States is actually Canada. So our government is turning around and selling these lands to Canadian businesses and entities. So, not necessarily the CCP, but still just as concerning as we'd hope it would stay here in the United States. Yeah.
So, how much land then? Are you saying the government actually has a lien on 46% of farmland and ranch land in the US?
Well, so the Farm Credit Administration holds 46% of the United States agricultural debt. It holds tens of millions of acres as collateral. And I think what's important to draw attention to at this point is the monopolization that's been allowed to expand in recent years under what are called the Big Four. And it really would appear that the regulations that have passed in recent decades have prioritized the monopolization of our production and livestock industry.
So this is something really important, and I want you to give us examples how this happened, because we're supposed to have antitrust laws that work. We're
Correct.
not supposed to have monopolies in the United States, and yet we do. And so, and it's not just in the meat packing industry and the meat processing, but in other food industries as well. So tell us what you can about what's gone on.
Correct. So I'll just give a small example of JBS. In 2020, they were found guilty of price fixing. And there's something called the tournament system. The tournament system is a USDA offering through its quote unquote affiliates and or subsidiaries, excuse me. Um, and essentially, what the tournament system does is allow for large corporations to send very specific genetics to a farmer, and it's contract farming, right? So, say I enter into a tournament agreement with JBS. They would send me a flock of their chicks. They would send me the feed, their approved veterinary care. And when I'm done raising those birds, for example, they would come and pick them up and take them to slaughter processing.
Right.
Um,
Okay. Let me stop you. All right. The US government uses these wacko words to confuse everybody about what's really going on. But what Breeauna is talking about is how farmers became serfs on their own land. Okay. So they made deals. It started with chickens. So you think that there are local chicken farms around you. When you drive around, you can see chicken houses. But in fact, in most cases, probably about 80%, those chickens are not actually owned by the farmer. But as Breeauna said, they've made a contract with some large chicken company. One of them is called Cal Maine, for instance, which indicates it's right across the country. And they all the farmer has is the land and the chicken house and the workers. And the company, Cal Maine or another large chicken company, will bring the chickens, will bring the feed, will bring the bedding, will bring the pesticides, and the farmer has to use whatever the company gives them. I had a patient who was one of these farmers who became chemically sensitive because of all the chemicals he was exposed to that he had no control over, that the large company was demanding that he use on the chickens because they're grown up too close together, in not very cleanly environments, so they have to use a lot of chemicals on them. Anyway, and then when the chickens are grown, if they're broilers in a certain few weeks, or if they're egg layers, they may last for, I don't know, a couple of years. The trucks will come from the company and they'll pick up the broilers or the eggs, and they'll go away. And the farmer is getting paid a fixed price for this, no matter what the price of eggs or broilers is. So during, and then again, these large farms, if there's bird flu around, they make a deal with the government. The government pays them $16 a chicken to kill the chickens. Now, the farmer doesn't get that $16. Cal Maine gets the $16, and the farmer may get nothing, or $2 or $3 for each chicken. And then, because he had chickens with bird flu on his property, he's not allowed to grow any more chickens for 6 months. And so he takes a loss, and then maybe, the US government comes in, they've got a lien on his property, they've loaned him money, and they take over and it gets sold. And that's how farmers have become serfs. You can probably elaborate, but I want to give people the basics.
Yeah, Meryl, it comes down to three very simple words: means of production. And we have allowed monopolies to acquire and take over our means of production. The reason why we're not growing our own poultry, for example, is because there's nobody that has a poultry processing facility. Our local locker, for example, where it would take, say, our hogs or our cattle to be processed, they will not even touch chickens. Now, there are some states who have adopted the on-farm slaughter exemption of the federal government, which would allow something up to, most states have allowed up to 2,000 birds per year to be slaughtered on farm and packaged for your own consumption. This is what's known as a cottage law exemption. So if I want to eat the broilers that I raise on my farm, then I'm allowed to. I'm given permission by the federal government to process my own birds. It's just so sweet of them. But the problem here is that I can't eat 2,000 birds a year, and the idea of me raising, the whole concept of me doing a free range organic, raising birds the way that I want them raised for my own family, is to hopefully offset some of that cost by selling them to other people who also want healthy, non-pesticide, non-sprayed, poultry products in their own refrigerator. So it's this, concept of seizing the means of production that have landed us in the position that we're in. And then there's one other, aspect of this, which is the liquidity crisis, right? When you are prioritizing either in regulatory or monetary policy the largest monopolies within our industry, and allowing them in many instances to set nutritional guidelines, to help write monetary policy, to help draft your regulations, right? All of these, your entire sort of bureaucratic process, the regulatory process, suddenly becomes um, uh, very beneficiary for these selected and then protected, wink, wink, multinational corporations, because I certainly cannot compete with, say, child labor, for example, which just came up in recent reports, JBS, right? Again, I can't compete, for
So just
example,
wait a sec. So JBS, you won't see JBS's name listed on any meat products, but they have 120 roughly different labels in the United States. So you think you're buying a product from one company and then a product from another company, but no, a lot of it is JBS. They are the number one seller of beef and chickens in the world. They're a Brazilian company. They got large through consolidation, through buying up other companies, and the way they did this was bribing a lot of politicians in Brazil. They've gotten into trouble for that, but that didn't really stop them. And now they've bought up, an amazing number of companies and tried to vertically integrate. So they want to own the meat packers, they want to own the ranchers, they want to own the supermarkets, they want to own every part of the process. And in order to do that, they have to put a lot of people out of business. And so that is their goal. So they will and they can ship around the world because they have producers all around the world. So if things are getting, if there's a higher price in the United States this year, they'll ship more meat into the United States. If there's a lower price, they'll ship it out and go somewhere else. And because the United States, up until recently, we're not sure because President Trump said he was taking us out of the World Trade Organization, but we're not officially out of it yet. So the World Trade Organization actually did not allow American food producers, so if you're raising beef, to put a label on your beef that said made in USA, right? So you could bring beef from Brazil or Mexico and it's already cut up. It's frozen and you just repackage it. You could repackage it and say made in USA because you put a different label on it. You put a different package. That was good enough for the World Trade Organization. And because we were a member, we had to comply with that. So none of the labels of meat that you're looking at that say made in USA mean anything at all. Now, if we do get out of the World Trade Organization, we can change this, but it will require some, legislative work probably. Right now, yeah.
We're really hoping to push for mandatory country of origin labeling in the new farm bill. This is a whole other side of hollowing out America's farming and ranching industry by bringing in cheap imports plagiarized as product of the United States. So people honestly have no idea what they're buying at the grocery store, then it's drastically impacting our own American farmers and ranchers, because as I was saying before, we just can't compete with cheap imports or a
That's right.
labor class
Well,
that's
if you're paying a farm worker $17 an hour, and in Mexico they're paying them $2 an hour, we
correct.
can't compete.
Correct.
And and of
But
course, when the
it's not
company
just
is, go
it's
ahead.
not just that, Meryl. It's the regulatory burdens as well. You're talking about the poultry houses, for example. We own the poultry houses. However, when the USDA and say APHIS, for example, which is the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, when they are consistently adding new regulations about how poultry houses should operate, or when the EPA adds a new regulation about water or wastewater, for example, we have to find a bank that will be nice enough to lend us money so that we can revamp those poultry houses just to even stay in business. And these monopolies, they don't take on any of that cost. So all of these regulatory burdens are geared towards the independent or just American farmer and rancher in general. And we cannot compete against other countries that don't regulate their industry the way that America regulates us, right? So it's not just the lower cost of labor or the but it's the fact that their dollar is far less valuable than the dollar, the US dollar. So working against currency imbalance. We're working against trade imbalances or tariff imbalances up until recently. And then we're dealing with the regulatory and labor imbalances as well. So, I mean, the cards are really stacked against us. We just absolutely cannot compete in this marketplace. It's not fair. It is not fair trade at all.
So let me expand on something you've mentioned twice, which is the banks didn't want to lend you money. And I want to explain that this is something I did not understand. I thought banks would lend, to anybody with good credit, or if you own land, why wouldn't they lend to you? Well, it turns out the government was whispering in the ear of the banks for the last 5 to 10 years that there were certain industries the government wanted to disadvantage, and they figured out by denying them financing, encouraging banks not to lend money to these industries, they could put them out of business. So one of these industries was cryptocurrencies, interestingly enough. And Mark Andreessen has talked about that on, I think, Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan.
Hmm.
Another industry was pot growers. Okay, so if you are growing pot or if you're growing CBD oil, government did not want you to get any money from a bank for lending. And I know this sort of on a personal level, not that I had anything to do with it, but the treasurer of my organization, had started a credit union in Maine to lend to farmers, and they wound up lending a lot of money to CBD and pot farmers because they couldn't get the money from any regular banks. And his credit union was in danger because of that, because the government could come on down on them with new regulations. So the use of regulations by agencies it's lawfare. It's a very nasty
That's right.
thing. And in the case of the banks, in many cases, they didn't use regulations. They just whispered in their ear, just like they did with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, because the agencies that wanted to shut them down didn't have the authority to do it. So they just said, look, if you're a doctor giving it out, we could investigate you and take your license. Or if you're a pharmacy that's dispensing it, we'll investigate you. So just don't do it. And this is basically what's happened in farming as well. So the government has become almost a criminal enterprise that has picked winners and losers, and then put pressure on industries like banking to make the losers lose and the winners win. And so go ahead now.
That's
Sorry.
absolutely right. And I see we're kind of getting near the end of our time. So I think what's the most important is to address the fact that as our farming and ranching communities have been hollowed out, as we have lost 77 family farms per day, which, as we mentioned in the beginning, is 98% of America's farming and ranching community are family farms. The average cattle rancher, for example, runs less than 50 head of cattle. I don't think most people realize that. Bottom line, though, as we continue to lose 77 family farms per day, this is a national security crisis. We have become our industry, has been solely monopolized by the big four, two of which are
Big
owned
four
by other countries.
meat processors.
Correct. Yes. So Smithfield, for example, is solely owned by the CCP. JBS is Brazilian owned, for example. So we have foreign countries with their hooks in our industry here in the United States that control our means of processing. And we have become solely dependent on imports for our own domestic food supply, our supply chains. I think in times of peace, that's okay. It should be a little bit more diversified just for secure, redundancies create security, especially in supply chains. However, when we are looking at potential proxy wars on multiple fronts, we already have our shipping lanes that have, we'll just say, experienced turmoil. We have potential parasitic flies coming up from South America, for example. Our supply chains are not as healthy as we would like them to be, right? They're quite volatile, in fact, at this point in time. And in an effort to shore up some of those insecurities, I think now is a really important time to begin addressing these issues within our food supply and our supply chain, so we don't have another repeat of COVID-19 when we had completely bare shelves and people didn't know where to go to get food. We've got to stop criminalizing food production. I mean, for goodness sakes, I think it might be easier to sell heroin than raw milk. And that's a problem.
People have said that, yes. Yeah, it's a crazy business. So again, let me emphasize what you're saying. The United States is the land of the cowboy. So we were the number one beef producing country in the world, but now we're not. And the United States has become a net importer of beef, if you can believe it. 26% of our ground beef is imported. And, a lot, if not all of that, contains pink slime. It's been processed with possibly ammonia, bleach, and other chemicals. 90% of broilers in a New York Times article from about 12 years ago were found to contain arsenic in their feathers. They were actually fed low doses of arsenic to make their breasts pinker. We are bringing cows over the border from Mexico and Canada, live cows, and then we're bringing cut meat from New Zealand, Australia, South America, and other places that really we have no business doing that. We shouldn't be doing that, but we are down to raising as many cows as were raised in the United States in 1951. So 73 years ago, we had half the population in the United States,
I was just going to say, with half the population. Yep.
and now we have the same amount of cows being grown here, and the reason is because the ranchers can't make money. Tell us about your own situation with your ranch, please, Breeauna.
Right. So we are down to just a couple of cows. We have had to sell off our open heifers just to cover things like taxes. We got hit with a very, very hefty property tax bill this year, and then turn around in April and we got hit again with federal taxes. So, we're just trying to cover our basics. We're lucky that we have a really good farm management team that helps out with on the ground operations. But I mean, it is really rough right now, and we are in that sort of decision making process. Do we try and shoot for 10 more head? Do we go for calves this year, or do we just call it quits and enjoy our kids while they're young? I don't know, honestly. It's a tough decision, and many of our neighbors are going through it just the same right now.
So
So
what were you raising before, and how many cows did you have? Do you only have cows, or do you have other products?
so mainly cows, yeah. We've raised some pigs in the past, but they're mostly just in our freezer. They're mostly for our consumption because I don't want to buy mRNA injected pork from the grocery store. So all the pork that we have in our home comes from our own farm. So it's always been cattle, and yeah, and we're down right now because it's just there's no inventory, and the price of even a calf is absolutely astronomical. So we had one bad breeding season, and it hurt. It hurt very badly. We lost a couple of calves, and I don't know. That could be it for us. So we'll see.
So how many acres do you have, and how many head of cattle could you raise on those acres?
So we've got 25 acres, and that's not very much. So I would only personally, put one animal per acre. I feel comfortable raising about 10 head at a time here, and that's the most we've had up until this point. So we're just a very small operation. What I would love to be able to do, though, um, is raise all grass-fed, non-GMO beef for our school. Our kids go to a private school here in town. We have a wonderful community and staff, and I would love to be able to have, our family's farm provide the beef for the lunch menu there. It doesn't make sense to me that we're not able to do that. I just want our kids to be able to eat healthy, and that's the long term dream someday.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. I mean, the federal government is paying for 5 billion school lunches a year, and some number 1 to 2 billion breakfasts a year, and yet there's no effort to make any of that food come from local producers. Food travels, they say, on average 1,500 miles to get to you at your location here in Maine. I suspect the food travels on average 3,000 miles. Um, we get it we're at the end of the line, and the food is old, and we have, produce 4 months of the year from our local producers because we're in the same sort of temperature range that you are. It's cold most of the year, and you can't grow things. And so it's coming from California or Mexico. In fact, I don't know the numbers, I can't remember, but roughly half of our produce, I think, and fruits and vegetables comes from outside the United States, which
Hmm.
is crazy. And it's simply a reflection of our tariffs, uh, the fact that we still pay farm workers only 60% of the average income for other jobs. I mean, in Florida, a farm worker in 2023 was making $14 an hour on average, and about $16, $17 an hour in other states. So why would anyone go into farming? And that's the idea. The idea has been big ag, big food has been paying off the members of Congress, and they vote for policies that benefit big ag and big food and throw the farmers off the land. And now that we have a possibility with Maha that things can change, it's really, really critical that we try to do that. And as you said, one of the first things that can be done is to get the US government to buy local food for the school lunch program, for the military, for Indian reservations, which get food, and they have other programs. There has been a program in many states, I don't know if all, that started recently, in which if you were on food stamps, you could use those food stamps at health food stores, at farm stands, and get fresh local produce and dairy. And I think meat, you could only buy a certain amount per day. But and your food stamps would be valued as if they were twice. So the fresh food that you were buying locally, if it cost $10, they would only take $5 off your food stamps, and then the government would pay the other $5. So that's a very good program. It has a different name in every state, so I'm sorry I can't tell you. But if you look around, you'll see many people will see those programs exist. And it's important to know about them so you can get in on it, because you get, double the value of your money. You just have to keep going shopping because there's only so many dollars they'll give you per day. But otherwise a very good program.
Hmm.
Um, so what else can be done? Well, since the state inspected facilities for meat slaughtering and processing are supposed to be at least as good as USDA inspected facilities, why not allow them to sell the meat freely across the United States? And Mike Rounds, a senator, has introduced a bill to do just that. So it's very important that we support that bill. Ideally, we would let farmers who butcher on their property and process on their property um, sell to consumers who came to their farm to buy meat. If a consumer knows that one farmer is producing really good quality products, particularly meat, it might be other things like dairy, why does the government not allow that farmer and that consumer to contract with each other? Why can't the farmer sell to the consumer? If the consumer drives to their farm and says, your stuff is the stuff I want, I don't want the garbage in the grocery store. And right now, the government's preventing that, even though there are virtually no reports of infections coming from those sorts of transactions. And so we at Door to Freedom are going to be pushing for a law that will allow that. Because right now, what's been happening is the laws have gotten worse and worse over time, tightening up what the farmer is allowed to do. And so we want the farmer to be allowed to transact with whoever wants to transact directly with them. And I mean, when I was a kid, my mother went to the butcher to buy meat. You could get what cuts you want, and you knew what you were getting. You could see the meat, you had a pretty good idea of who was a good guy, where they were getting their cattle from, etc. Those butcher shops almost don't exist anymore. And so when everything is packaged in a grocery store, you've just got no idea what it is you're buying. And you might be able to tell us how the quality of your beef, for instance, which is presumably all grass-fed, you don't feed them grain, you feed your cows hay in the winter? Is that what you do, or?
Correct. Yes. So we either bale our own hay or we buy from, we have a deal worked out with one of our neighbors. So we buy alfalfa. Yeah. So anyways, we do feed hay through the winter or alfalfa mix. But yeah, for the most part, our cows and our horses are just out. They're not stalled or penned or, which we didn't even get in the whole CAFO conversation another time for sure.
Yes.
Yes, so our animals are out year round and they're allowed to graze and walk and eat and digest just like they're supposed to. And the quality of our meat is pretty impressive, especially for grass raised. Sometimes when you have a grass raised, grass finished cow, you won't have as much fat or as much marbling. And in fact, when we took our first cow down to the locker, our butcher said, "This is grass fed," because it was just so. I mean, the even the fat was pure white, but there was a lot of it, and it was really nicely marbled. And he was just shocked that this was a grass fed, grass finished cow. So we got a lot of compliments on that, and everybody who tried it, who was part of our herd share agreement, they were incredibly happy with the products that we produced. So I would like to keep doing that. It feels amazing to be able to produce something that people want and is in demand and they're happy to be a part of. The costs are just quite exorbitant at this time, and there's a lot of uncertainties going forward. So I would love to see the Farm Bill start to address some of those uncertainties so that we can start building back our herds across the United States.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Breeauna. I hope everybody heard this and is really paying attention, because this is a critical issue for this time that's gone completely unreported by the media, and we're going to keep pounding on it and trying to make a difference. So thank you again, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Meryl.
Okay, we're live. Tell us your name.
John Militello.
And you are?
Gina Gentry.
No, it's Italian, I'm feeling.
Sicilian, not Italian.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah, get it right. Gosh. Well, someone did call me Australian, so it's the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's rude.
Absolutely.
Right, let's start with you. Talk to us about what happened.
I had a doctor that was insisting on giving me a COVID shot. So, I wouldn't take it.
Why wouldn't you take it?
Because Fuji, I call them Fuji, follow the money. It's all about money. And they have that pill. What is that pill, Gina? Ivermectin. Ivermectin. And that's better than the shots, and it's cheaper.
And what happened when you said no?
Well, they just, they keep on you and on you. I go to the VA hospital. They want to give you the shots. I had a lawyer friend of mine calling me up and telling me you should get the shots, and I refuse.
And do they keep on and on and on?
Yeah, they're pretty consistent. Every time I go to the VA, oh, you don't want the shot, and I won't take it.
What did they say will happen to you if you don't take it?
Well, they really don't. They say you're at risk. You know, they'll imply you're at risk. But, you know, they don't. My doctor was the guy that said, told my son, your father got COVID and he deserves it. You know, of course, I don't go to that doctor anymore.
So basically, you got COVID, and your son was talking to your doctor, and your doctor said to your son that you deserve to get COVID.
Well, yeah, you deserve what you're going through, yes.
And to suffer.
What's wrong with these people?
Well, you know, you got to realize something. The American people don't have the brains of a boiled beet. And that's all about, everything is money.
Right.
And that's what, it's just like now with this, they're coming back with another strain of COVID. Of course, the election's 1 year away. So they use that to manipulate. And this lawyer friend of mine would call me up and get it. Well, it ends up where on a Sunday morning he didn't feel good. The next Sunday he was dead. I'm not saying that it was caused by the shots, but there sure could be a possibility of it. So
What did your son say to the doctor when your doctor
called him up, and he says about me having the COVID or sick. He says, you know, he wanted to try to get the pills, which my son did.
The ivermectin, you wanted to try and
Yes.
get it, yeah?
And he did get them, and that helped me tremendously.
Yeah. And how are you feeling today?
Well, I'm 79 years old, and I was pulling a straight edge today, concrete. I work in concrete.
You were pulling a what?
A straight edge, just to level the
That's
concrete.
a
See?
tool.
And some of your colleagues who took the shot, how are they doing?
Well, the one guy died. Now, I'm not saying it's from the
No,
shots.
no, we're not saying that.
You know, he was pretty healthy. But what ended up happening is that, you know, there was somebody else that took the shots, and women, I don't know if it was somebody my wife knew or something, and they had problems from the shots.
So are you pleased that you stood firm and said no?
Oh, I won't get the shots.
No
I
matter what?
have faith in Jesus Christ will heal you, right?
Amen.
You deal with that. I don't deal with the politicians.
We don't deal with mankind and a silly authority. No, no.
You're absolutely right.
Right, what happened to you? Now this is your dad.
This is my
Dad,
dad,
daughter.
Yes,
Okay.
dad, daughter. So I was 26 and I had gone to my OBGYN for a regular checkup. And during the visit, they came in and said that I needed to get the HPV vaccine, and I must get it now because I was at that cusp of being 26 and not being able to get it anymore. When they had, I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't knowledgeable about what vaccines did at the time. So my grandma had just died from breast cancer. So I was very concerned and scared, especially because they said that it was to decrease your risk of cancer. It could save you for cancer. They didn't tell me that it only protected you against 3 or 4 strains of cancer, nor did they tell me that it was only if you had multiple mates before a certain age that your risk of cervical cancer went up. So I got it unwillingly, but I complied just because I was concerned and scared from what they had told me. About a month after my last series of it, I was in a cafe in Amherst, New York, and a mother and daughter were standing there talking to the person that was behind the counter, and they had said about how the Gardasil vaccine has links to cancer. And I stopped and I thought to myself, I'm like, wait a second, I just got that vaccine and they didn't tell me that, which is what, kind of started me thinking about things. I started to get migraines, and I started to have tics in my neck where people would ask me what was wrong with me because I would just be like twitching. Again, I didn't know any of the results of a vaccine, so I made up stories. Oh, I had a skiing accident when I was younger, I think it's from that. Or I pretended that I had Tourette's for school projects, so I thought it was that. And didn't realize exactly what was causing it until a few years later when I was pregnant with my first child, and I started to look into vaccines because something was telling me not to get her vaccinated. And I started to see the effects were neurological effects or migraines to some side effects. And I started to connect the dots that for 26 years of my life, I lived without a single migraine, without any neck problems, anything. And after that, I had started to have these situations occur. I went, since I was 26, every single month, if not twice a month, I would suffer from migraines. Until just recently, I found someone who detoxed me, and they did muscle testing and saw that I had aluminum in my ovaries, which they said was one of the causes from vaccines. And so that's what it is.
Sad.
It is.
It's my baby.
Well, of course, it's your baby.
Let me take that off
We
live
got
video.
3 children. She was after 11 years.
This is a live video about vaccines. So,
But this is
a
what?
live video about vaccines, not about.
I know what I'm saying. And
Yeah,
she's-
but when they hurt your baby,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, these
Yeah.
people have got a lot to answer for.
Yeah. So, but
The
because
problem is they don't answer for it. They don't answer for it.
but
You can't sue them. They put that into the law that if you get sick from getting a COVID shot, you cannot sue them. It was passed by Congress.
But that's also why I chose not to vaccinate my kids, because I've learned from that after the first one. I have an intuition. Looking into it, I was like, I will never put a vaccine in my kid.
So how old are your children?
I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, soon to be 10 actually, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old.
And they've had no vaccines at all.
No, the only one that I didn't really know, because I was told by a nurse it was a vitamin, and again, I was not knowledgeable, was the vitamin K. But other than that, they've had none
And
whatsoever.
how's their health?
Oh, we've had 2 sick visits in all of the 11 years, and one was for a rash that she incurred from a bounce house, and the other one was just recently she had strep throat. Other than that, nothing. And with my first child, actually, going back to the pediatrician, I was told in the doctor's office that not vaccinating my child with the whooping cough vaccine, that she would die. He said that to me, that I would.
And did she die?
Oh no, she's alive, healthy, and sassy as all sassy can be.
So doctor wrong
A
again.
doctor was wrong again.
But they use the fear tactics to get people. And if you really, if people would research, I go to a nurse practitioner, and she says, if you've seen what they put in them COVID shots, it's unreal. You know, and the problem is like I say, is that, right now, they've weaponized the FBI, the DOD. You can't get away with certain things with these people. And they'll put you, they shut the city down during the pandemic. You know, we worked, there were certain jobs were exempt. But that Fuji, that guy there, I'll tell you, millions and millions of dollars he made if you follow the money to put fear into people.
Do you think they're going to try and lock us down again
Yes,
this winter
before the election.
I have thoughts.
for the primaries?
No,
For
before
the actual election.
The actual election.
How about we got some time?
Yes.
Yeah, we have some time.
Some
I
time.
think that they're going to start to instill fear, like even now around this area, as numbers are rising for COVID.
Masking up. Are people masking up again?
There's more people wearing masks now in the
They
stores
want
and
them
stuff.
to.
I can't wait. What do people don't understand?
Because people, I'll tell you, the American people are really ignorant. I mean, you talk to
It's not just the American people.
Well,
It's
I'm
all-
saying I live
it's
in
all
America
people.
and I see it. And they're very ignorant to the fact that politically, the politicians are making money from it. That's exactly what it's all about, the money. Now, if you can I had a friend of mine, and she knew I had COVID and I got them pills. So she called me up and she says, because her boyfriend's sister had it and so on. So she called me up and then I gave her the information. So she called up for 7 weeks supply. It cost her $200. So you can imagine what them shots we've paid the government, the taxpayers for them shots. I don't get the flu shot either.
You shouldn't get any shot.
No, I don't get the flu shot. They want to give you the flu shot. You know, See, but the nurse practitioner that I go to, first, she's a Christian. Second of all, she believes in health, through your diet and so on, So she's very good.
You two are great. And thank you for organising today.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's been fun to see you all soaking wet in the rain.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
That's a normal day in England.
It's just the way things go here in
That's
Buffalo.
right.
You're lucky it's not snow.
Yeah.
That downpour.
That's why we got that.
Yeah, we've got a few months to go before the snow comes, right?
Yeah, so thank you for coming now.
We've had it in October, the October surprise.
That's right.
And
Well, we'll
shut
be
down.
gone by then.
Yeah, stay out of New York.
So now you're based out of,
Well, based all over the place. The Children's Health events are based
Yes.
pretty much. Anyway, I'm going to come off here for now so the people aren't listening to our little private conversation.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.